All right. Well, without further ado, let's jump onto our keynote. Like Eric, Dr. Walker just mentioned that when there's a new commodity, there is risk, but there's also opportunities. And we're excited about that here in Tennessee. So let's welcome our keynote speaker, Seth Boone. Seth is the VP of Business Development of PanXchange in Colorado. Seth is tasked with ensuring PanXchange's platform and analysis to meet a rapidly evolving hemp industry's needs and develop new opportunities in emerging agricultural markets. Raised on a ranch in West Texas, he offers a background beginning in production agriculture before continuing his career merchandising feed grains and other agriculture commodities for StoneX and JBS. Seth holds a master's degree in agriculture economics from Purdue University and is passionate about our emerging agricultural markets growth and future. So you don't want to miss his great presentation. Seth, welcome to Tennessee and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Iris. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. And yeah, thanks for introducing me. I'll kind of skip the introduction slide here. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right. So kind of what I'll go over, I'll start over with just kind of an intro and overview of PanXchange, then cover some like macroeconomic trends that we're seeing relevant to the hemp industry and the industry as a whole. And then I'll kind of dive into more detail on the industrial applications, kind of cover some relevant hot topics, recent market developments, potential opportunities we're seeing, and then get into a projection. Beyond that, then I'll cover the cannabinoid sector, which is probably the more where more attention is going to still at the moment. Kind of follow the same format there. Then I'll work into some more supplemental opportunities, kind of cover planning decisions on their own, and then kind of close up from there, and then we can go into questions. Now, I won't go over myself since you've already done such a good job introducing me, but to kind of cover what PanXchange does, we're still I would still call us a startup, but we've been around for a while. We're founded in 2011. We're headquartered here in Denver, Colorado. We were started by Julie Lerner, our CEO and founder, who was an ex-Cargill sugar trader and traded other items as well, and then had this idea for a lot of the nascent markets that were coming out. She started this company really for the East Africa agricultural products, which we still trade live on our platform. We still have an office in Uganda. And ever since that, we've really focused on nascent markets. We've branched out and gotten to feed grains and honestly figured our tools that we provide are more geared to these nascent markets and growing markets. And our most recent development has really been on the U.S. industrial hemp play piece. We've been looking at it since 2014, and we've been reporting and providing data since the program was launched in 2018. And that's really what kind of drawed me to this company. I see hemp as the first of many opportunities for the American farmer to diversify and kind of get out of the system that we've been in for the past 30 or so years. So I just see this as a huge opportunity for the American farmer and the industry as a whole. But time to getting into our goals, like our whole goal for working with these nascent markets is to, one, enhance transparency with the data we provide, and then also use our platform to help the industry develop and gain supply chain efficiencies. And I'll kind of get into more of how we do that here. Now, there's two main things that we offer, or two prongs to our business model. One would be the market analysis that we provide, and then the trading platform. Now, the market analysis, we provide spot price indices for both biomass in your main state, in your major production states like Colorado, Oregon, and Kentucky. And this changes all the time as well as we see the things trade. So I think we've had a Tennessee benchmark before, but we've recently had to take that into a more general benchmark Beyond that, we offer benchmarks for refined products such as winterized crude, full spectrum distillate, broad spectrum CBD isolates, and we've we've been reporting prices on industrial products for some time as well. I think our first was June 2019, but we're being more involved on that on the industrial side as we're seeing that market grow. Like currently, we're offering benchmark prices for true hemp, several different products for herds, grain, and then also semi-processed fibers. Beyond that, beyond the price piece, we offer objective industry analysis for both like domestic and international legislations. And we use proprietary and public data analysis as well, but we really focus on emerging and actionable market trends and opportunities for the cannabinoids and industrial markets. Now, the platform is kind of where I'm biased towards. The bias is really, I mean, the platform is really a voice box for the industry to develop standards and really direct the market with where we're heading as far as specifications and standard practices. Now, the way we do that is really we're just a mouthpiece for buyers and sellers to come together and create a supplemental market. And the biggest things that we're seeing there is the actual products, like the product specifications. For example, a good example would be like a micro-sized herd. We're seeing those products develop from the buyers that we're working with, and we're using our platform to illustrate those things and almost advertise the marketable products that are out there. Now, our end goal here for the platform is to provide this a source of market efficiency, and then get to the point and also hold the data enough to where we can get a financial contract or derivative down the road to where growers and processors alike can eventually hedge products. Now, kind of getting into the macroeconomic trends for hemp, I'd say one of the biggest, or I would say probably the thing that's most in front of your face is the COVID-19 recovery. There's a lot of talk about the return of brick and mortar and CBD stores, but I honestly think the general economic recovery is going to have a much larger impact. We're going to see more disposable income come through American households, and therefore they're more likely to spend money on products such as CBD, hemp oil, or other products they normally wouldn't if they're cash tight. And beyond that, there's a humongous push for sustainability across the board. Now, is how that pertains to hemp, I mainly see that going into like biodegradable plastics, which we're seeing herd trade into for the filament side already. We're not exactly getting into a true bioplastic yet, but expect that to change rapidly this year. And beyond that, you've got to look at the reduced environmental footprint factors, the carbon managements, and then the demand for circular economies. Now, there's no question that hemp has proven that it can sequester carbon better and more efficiently than most other crops. And I see that as a big piece going forward. Carbon markets are going to be a thing. There's already voluntary carbon markets out there, and there's several other companies that we know of that are working on launching these as we go along. And hemp is going to play a major role in that. I think the carbon sequestration is what's going to see the traditional row crop farmer really adopt into hemp as well. Then beyond the sustainability piece, the other big macroeconomic factor that I see is marijuana legalization or decriminalization. Many are already calling it inevitable. I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year, but it's extremely likely within the next 8 to 10 years. But for me, the biggest piece pertaining to hemp, as far as marijuana legalization goes, is the regulation side. And beyond that, I would say it's whether we regulate and administer these two crops as a whole, if we regulate cannabis as a whole, or if we divide these things out by CBD and THC. Now, I think the factors there is we're going to see this either, if we separate the regulation piece, we're going to see these things act as almost as a competitive product. But if we regulate these things as a whole, I see there's much more opportunity where these things can work to supplement each other and almost balance the market a little bit better. And I'll get down more into that down the road, but let's move on to things that we're seeing on the industrial side. Now, the hot topics that we see on on the industrial side, primarily it's the drive for sustainable products in sustainable markets. The reduced carbon footprint, reduced emissions in, we're already seeing people incentivizing sequestration in the private markets already. And I think that's just going to continue. I think voluntary carbon markets are going to emerge, and then eventually we're going to see the government step in with either some sort of cap and trade or some other mechanism to try to achieve an equilibrium in that regard. Beyond that, we're seeing a huge demand for bioplastics, recycled materials, reducing the plastic footprint in the ocean is a huge demand driver on the demand side. And I believe these people that are working on the bioplastics, they have the demand lined up. It's really finding the supply and developing the technology to make these things happen. So this year, I would say bioplastics is going to make a big leap forward, and we're going to see that market develop quite a bit. And beyond that, we've got to look at the other impactful products that may be a little bit further behind on the innovation curve. For example, hemp paper, there's people looking for pulp and fiber out there right now. It's just the vast majority of the products that they're getting can't justify making a true, what you would call an office paper product. We're seeing a lot of that go into packaging materials and other niche paper applications. And then the textile side, there's a huge demand for it. We're seeing companies like Patagonia really push for hemp in their clothing items, and doing that here in America. The only thing is I'd say textiles might be the farthest behind the demand curve in the major products that we're seeing, on the innovation curve, I mean. Beyond that, it's repatriating American hemp. There's large amount of drive for that. The American economy has been a huge focus of the industry, of our economy, for several years now, repatriating American jobs. I see hemp as playing a huge role in that. I think our agricultural practices, we can produce hemp biomass as cheaper than anyone else in the world. It's really the scale of the processing side that we need to see develop to really bring American hemp back. Overall, I still think we're several years to go, especially on the fiber side, but we're closer on a lot of sectors than you would think. For example, plastics would be the market that I'd say is actually trading in volume at the moment. Now, let's kind of move on to some more relevant market developments. Right now, the biggest development we're seeing is there's just a general shift in attention towards the industrial applications. I mean, CBD prices are unattractive. And I think we've reported multiple times that the United States needs much less than 5,000 acres to supply this current CBD demand. I think what we did, the range that we looked from, like the Statista retail estimates, which is a 1.85 for this year, and then the Nielsen, I think, is 3.5 billion, and then backwarding that out with your THC default rates and then just your processor yields, that comes out to like a 1,500 to 3,000 acre demand. So, I mean, we're just too good on the yield side for us to justify large amounts of CBD acres until we see the demand side really grow. Now, beyond that, we're already seeing volume trade for industrial hemp feedstocks. We're seeing hurd, such as a 250 micron particle-sized hurd go into plastics. We're seeing like 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch hurd materials go into bedding, building materials, and absorbents. And then we're also seeing a market develop for like your short 1/4 inch fibers and below going into plastics as well. Now, for plastics, it's primarily going into the filament market. We're not making a true bioplastic yet. There are some out there using corn resins, but for the vast majority, a lot of these more degradable plastics using hemp hurd are still using a fossil fuel supplied resin. Now, beyond that, we are seeing volume trade going into the paper and pulp industries. It's just very niche right now. We're seeing a lot of spent material from the CBD side go into these guys that are making packaging materials. But it seems like the people making office paper are demanding a more industrial specific product. I'm seeing a lot of these guys actually turn away CBD sourced material just because of the smell, coloring, and other issues that make it harder for them to work with. Now, outside of that, long fiber and grain is still very much in the innovation phase, but there's so much interest going on there. And I honestly think fiber is very close to closing the gaps on the supply chain side. Really, it's the decordifying and spinning side that we're really missing here in the United States. For example, Patagonia currently is growing in the United States. They're growing hemp in the United States, but they're still very much on the genetic development side, and they're having to send this material back to China to be processed. And rapidly, they're growing to try to get out of that. But I really have no idea on when that will be. And then as far as grain, there's huge demand from the food industry. We're seeing this stuff move into like protein powder, hemp oil, and several other supplements. There's other niche applications as well. So like the bioplastics guys are using this to try to develop a resin or a hemp-based resin. But honestly, I don't think grain can utilize its full potential until we see the feed regulations open up. But more importantly, I think the economics really need to develop for us to see a huge hemp impact on the grain industry. And predominantly, I think we need another revenue driver to cheapen the grain that we see on the market to actually make an impact on the feed industry. I think the current grain prices that we're seeing per pound justify to where it's almost 4 times as expensive as cottonseed meal. So for as far as feed applications outside of extremely localized economies, we're going to need to see fiber and herd pick up the slack and kind of make that product more competitive. Now, this year, I'd say like the potential opportunities for industrial applications. I mean, growing it's an opportunity, but you're going to have to take an extremely risk averse approach. You're going to have to consider all your other opportunity costs. I mean, for example, if you have row crop acreage in hand right now, you have to look at corn and soybeans. Those prices are higher than they've been in the past 5 years. And you have to consider that when you're making your budgets. And then beyond that, I believe Eric did a really good job on covering this, but you have to negotiate your sales prior to buying. Buyers are extremely specific with the product that they want, especially on the CBD side. And you have to make sure, one, that you can meet their specs before you can ever start growing. And then two, you have to make sure they're a reputable buyer. From the CBD side, we saw too many people follow the wayside, default, go into bankruptcy. And so many of those contracts were just liquidated because of that. And so be extremely careful, be as risk averse as possible. Wouldn't put your eggs all in one basket, but there is opportunity out there if you can find it. Now, the problem with processors is most of these people that are looking for the supply, they're doing it extremely locally. You may not be locally, and if you're not local to them, you're going to have to actually go out and find these people. But the good news is a lot of these people you can find on public data services. They all have licenses. So go to state websites and you can find databases of these people and you can call them up from there. Beyond that, the other potential opportunity I see is carbon credits. For example, a fiber-based hemp crop can sequester 11,000 pounds of carbon per acre. That's a massive amount of carbon, especially if you're depending on your operation. And I think it's when, if not if, these carbon credit markets really come to fruition. There's already a few programs out there. There's people that have traded these things. They've been heavily advertised, but do your research on them. That just because this one trade happened and it was advertised the way it is, that does not mean that everybody can jump in and be ready to market their carbon. But the good news from there is we're going to see several other companies step in on these voluntary carbon markets, and you're going to see a lot of diversification on that. Now, let's kind of get into projections here. Now, my biggest projection is we're going to see industrial acres surpass cannabinoids this year. I don't think there's any question about it. I think the decline in cannabinoid acres and just the licensing that we've seen suggests there's going to be I just don't see there is going to be anywhere north of 20,000 acres this year. And industrial acres, I think, have done that just this last year. Now, also what I'm seeing kind of driving this is from processors on the fiber and grain side, their biggest challenge is finding a steady and consistent supply. Now, from the plastics guys alone, like I've heard these people put out numbers that they would take, that they have the demand for 30 metric tons a month of this powdered hemp hurd. But the thing is they cannot find a consistent supply of it. And the processors that are creating this supply are saying the exact same thing. So I think there's going to be a huge push from these partnerships between these companies to create these acres and meet the demand that they're seeing on the other side. And then and into plastic specifically, with the economic recovery that we're seeing, we're actually seeing quite a bit of inflation from the input side for their normal products. Now, from resins and freight, you're seeing these plastics guys look at other alternatives, not just because of the sustainability piece. And depending on hemp and the scale that we can develop this year, we could easily compete with those markets. But beyond that, I honestly think imports are going to have to stay strong this year. I think there's going to be a huge push for American industry and infrastructure, but it's for, especially on the fiber side, we're going to have to import fiber to meet the demand. Now, the other big prediction I have for this year is there is going to be a driving sector or sectors emerge this year. Now, my bet is plastics, but I really think it only takes a few innovations for paper or textiles and building materials to bridge that gap. And for this year, for hemp to really take off, we're going to need one of those sectors to really, really pop and almost reduce the cost for all the other markets. For example, like if we see hurd really take off and we see revenue being created from that, it's going to lower the costs of inputs for paper and grain. And I think that's especially necessary if we want hemp to explode as a whole. I think we're going to need to create those positive feedback mechanisms. And then all these sectors are going to have to help the economies of scale everywhere else in order for us to really grow this industry. Now, that was industrial. And let's move on to the cannabinoids. Now, the biggest hot topics we're seeing there is obviously Delta 8 is one of the biggest ones that we've seen. From the top processors that we work with and talk with, I can confidently say it's potentially the largest source of demand over the past 6 months. Some of these processors, especially ones that have been really struggling over the past year, or they would say it's could easily be 80% of their demand. They really don't want to say that, but more than a few people have told me this. Now, beyond that, I mean, it's sucking out a huge amount of the oversupply that we have, but there's safety concerns developing, specifically with state level poison control centers. We're seeing Texas really step on it. There's already 11 or 12 states that have banned it. I honestly think more states are going to come through. I just don't know how many. Now, the feds stepping in, I am not too sure. There's so much emphasis in Washington right now on decriminalization that I think the DEA kind of just like holds off and lets the states do what they will on this until we get some sort of direction from marijuana legalization or decriminalization. But if the feds do step in, there are going to be some potential repercussions that could affect the CBD industry as a whole. One is you're just going to lose that demand. That's the evident one. But two is you could see over regulation on the CBD side, and particularly access to bulk CBD products. You might actually have to get a license to buy over a certain amount of bulk CBD now. I hope that doesn't happen. I really think that we're going to see this regulation and legislation pieces kind of come together as one, and hopefully we can avoid these repercussions on the CBD side. Beyond that, the other big legislation piece I see is the Hemp Act and Banking Act. Now, the Hemp Act is the big one, raising the THC threshold to 1%. And I've also heard that this will be testing the end use products, but I honestly don't know how that's going to hold up. So I'll kind of leave it at 1% testing in the field as well. And you have to ask, is it really going to help farmers? I think the immediate impact is you're not going to see as many defaults, but down the road, you're going to see genetics pick up, and eventually we're going to be bumping up against that 1% threshold again. And if we're bumping up against the 1% threshold of THC, that means you're going to have 20 to 30% potency CBD flower. Now, looking at the potency that we have now in the acreage estimate that I gave earlier, you can just go ahead and cut that into a third. You're going to see maybe 800 to 1600 acres be demanded by the market. That is just because of the yield that we have on the CBD side. But where I really see the real benefit there is on the R&D side. You're going to see more flexibility from the private sector and the public sector as well, as far as what they can do in researching these products. You can be more flexible with your THC thresholds, and you could potentially open doors on the genetic side that we couldn't have otherwise. Now, beyond that, the hemp banking, I think, is just good overall. I mean, it's even affecting us, and we don't even deal with the actual physical product. And I think just opening up financial tools for the hemp industry is going to be a huge boon for us. And then lastly, it's marijuana legalization. Now, the big thing here is when it actually happens, is it going to be a friend or foe to hemp? And again, it comes down to the administration, whether we combine these products or if we regulate them separately. I think if we regulate them separately, we're going to see the THC and CBD compete, like we did, for example, this year and during COVID. If we could combine these, I honestly see we have a more fluid market. Like this isomerization into Delta 8, that could happen for Delta 9 and THC as well. And we could actually alleviate some oversupplies in different markets by doing that. So I'm really hoping that they combine this legislation. But again, I'm by no means a legislative expert. I'm kind of getting into some more recent market developments. There's still a huge amount of liquidated refined product in regions like Colorado, Oregon, and Kentucky, your main initial production areas. Now, I think we've worked through a lot of the refined products. Right now, it's more of like lower quality refined products out there. Like I know there's some poorly winterized crude that people are just kind of passing around, not wanting to deal with. But outside of that, there's still a huge amount of biomass. On paper, we overproduced biomass by 150 million pounds in 2019 and 50 million in 2020 alone. That's just on paper. It's probably less than that when you consider the quality issues that we've seen out there. And then I think we were a little too conservative on our THC default as well. So there's probably less than that out there, but you can't argue that there's just a monumental amount of biomass out there. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, you really have to look at the viable supply that's out there, and we really have no idea. Then looking at Delta 8, again, it's flushed a huge amount of material out of the market so far. But is it enough? Well, we really don't know. We don't know the numbers that have really moved. There's so much of this stuff moving in private markets. It's so unregulated, you just can't tell. But when we've done the math, using the math above, we're going to have to move over 1 million kilograms of Delta 8 to suck up that 200 million pounds of biomass. But the caveat there, again, is the amount of viable material that's out there. From talking to processors, they're almost having to turn down half of the biomass that they look at. And a lot of it is you've got to consider the economics of these guys' operations. They're squeezed just like everybody else. And from what I've heard, if they have an 8% material or a biomass material, if they can't get 99% or 90% throughput efficiency through there, they still lose money. So these people are extremely picky. It's not just their CBD potency, it's also the way the material is prepped. And I'll get more into that down the road. Beyond that, we're seeing exports to the EU rise significantly this year as well. But again, with the nascent market, it's really hard to find the true data to figure out what is really moving. Export codes are extremely convoluted. I know they're working on getting those things more defined, but it's just really hard to find the exact number of CBD oil. There's either products that are lumped in together. Um, there's either products that are lumped in and combined together that really muddy the waters of the CBD portion of that. And then there's just many other codes that you can use that make it extremely hard to put the data together. Now, beyond that, 2021 planted acres are going to be the biggest factor of any potential rally we have this year. I mean, like I said earlier, U.S. demand only requires 1,650 to 3,200 acres this year with current yield and processor efficiencies. They're only getting more efficient. You can cut that in half if THC is capped to 1%. Now, as I said earlier, I don't foresee over 20,000 acres, but it wouldn't surprise me to see us in that 10 to 20,000 acres, in that 10 to 20,000 acre range. I'm really hoping for a 5 to 10. But I just think there's so much passion in this industry. There's so many people invested in this, and there's so many good ideas being floated out there. There's just too much conviction in the among hemp growers for me to really foresee us getting down to that 1,600 to 3,200 level. Now, on prices, like what we've seen, like lower quality material, so like a 4% biomass that may have been degraded, has a lot of shives and herd material in it, you're probably going to get to like 5 to 10 cents a point. But what we are seeing is if you have high grade biomass that is prepped right, like one thing that we're seeing is pelleted biomass. And then we're also seeing like really ultra refined dried biomass go anywhere from 20 to 30 cents a point. And from talking to processors for this upcoming year, they'd be willing to pay more than that as long as the material was higher grade. They don't want to be paying this low. It's just a lot of the material that they're being presented, they have to pay that low or they're not going to get the throughput they need to actually break even on that product. But that being said, we are seeing premiums emerge regionally for these quality products. And it's specifically outside of your recreational states like Colorado, Oregon, and then your major hemp producer like Kentucky. And I wouldn't say it's so much regional as it is quality dependent. Now, like working with like a company like Ecogen or someone else, they'd be willing to pay over those premiums, but it has to be a quality material. And then let's get into like some potential opportunities that I see, like on CBD specific opportunities. I mean, limited would be optimistic. I mean, you have to be extremely risk averse. I mean, only plant if you have sales arranged with a reputable vetted buyer, or you have some sort of equally sufficient outlet. Now, I'm not sure if any of y'all are direct to retail or if you're doing anything else besides growing, but you have to have some sort of sales outlet in order to even consider growing CBD. It's just too risky, especially with the material that's out there, to go unsold and plant. Now, beyond that, I think there are opportunities on the minor cannabinoids. Again, you have to really know your supply chain, have a sales outlet, but CBG and minors are some of the major things going over into the export market to Europe. And I think if you can find a contract, you potentially have a better chance of finding a good contract for CBG and CBN, as a lot of these people can't find it from the CBD market alone. Now, the caveat to that is acreage demand is just as small or smaller than it would be for CBD. So you have to really watch out and make sure and jump on any sale that you can before committing any kind of production. The other potential opportunity is I have to put Delta 8 in there just because of the economics behind it, but it's so extremely risky. It's extremely risky. It's unregulated. I mean, you're running a chance of getting your hand caught in the cookie jar and potentially not able to grow CBD down the road. So if you're going to pursue it as ethically as possible, do it the right way. Um, and also don't be surprised if there are some negative repercussions that come from going down that road. So if I personally, I wouldn't pursue that, but it still is an economic opportunity regardless. Now, some projections this year, I honestly think prices will make a modest recovery. We're seeing prices for full spec, isolate, and broad spec increase regionally, especially like in the Southeast, East, Midwest, a lot of your non-rec states. I'd say isolate is definitely more correlated to your non-recreational states because that's the primary refined product that's going into the Delta 8 market. And we're actually seeing if processors that if they're going to process something that they don't have sold, it's going to be to isolate just because of the potential to move it into the Delta 8 markets. Now, prices are going to recover, I believe, but it all comes down to when that first FSA acreage report comes out. And I believe that is in August. I just think there's going to be too much general interest in hemp to believe acres are going to suggest rationing demand further. And as soon as the buyers see that, and they're probably going to see it before these acreage demands come out, these acreage estimates come out, you're going to see buyers play really hand to mouth. They're going to bide time and not pay more than they have to until they can get into harvest. It's a commonality in the grain markets, and it's more than likely going to be in hemp as well. Now, other projection I see is Delta 8 is going to face tighter restrictions. I don't know if any federal agency will crack down on it as long as legalization and decriminalization is such a hot topic in Congress, but I do expect more states will come through. I know Texas has really been eyeing it. I know many other states have as well. I'm not sure if Tennessee will. I think Tennessee has actually released a statement clarifying that they don't they're interpreting the federal rule as only Delta 9. But there are going to be more states come through it. And if it's Tennessee or not, the overall demand is going to drop and it's still going to affect Tennessee regardless. Now, beyond that, the other projection I have is strong exports are going to continue. Europe may be kicking our butt on the fiber and grain and industrial side, but their CBD markets are still lacking. They're still importing large amounts from us just because we have such an oversupply and a competitive price. And I expect that's going to continue in 2021. Is I just see us still having an oversupply issue that it's going to take maybe up until this time next year, unless Delta 8 can do something about it to work through and alleviate. Now, let's look at some supplemental opportunities across the board. I've already covered this one quite a bit, but I'll touch on it again. Carbon credits, it's rapidly emerging. There's no reason just the industrial people can take advantage of this. The biggest thing I'm seeing from that is just a large demand from companies across the board. We've even been contacted on whether we're doing something on carbon from bigger corporations, and we're even considering it on our side. And really, the biggest driver of this is coming from companies like Patagonia. I think we've seen Shopify do it as well, purchase carbon credits. And it's really just prepping for when these cap and trade systems come through, and also just the marketability of improving your ESG scorecard or environmentally self-governance, or environmentally conscious self-governance is what I believe it is called. Now, this year, I think the cost and availability to a grower will become more accessible. Right now, like what we see on carbon credits is it's just almost expensive to get registered and start collecting carbon credits or acquiring carbon credits. And I think that cost and availability is going to lessen significantly this year. I think we're going to see major grain companies come through on this, as well as hemp companies, hemp processors, and everybody anybody and everybody that is involved in this industry is going to more than likely come through with this. Now, beyond that, if you're going to go and look at carbon carbon credits as a supplemental opportunity, do your homework before choosing. And the biggest piece of that is make sure the credits that you're gaining are marketable and reputable in the industry. And then beyond the carbon piece on supplemental opportunities, from this oversupply issue, the past year, really, the people that we've seen come out the healthiest have been the companies or growers that have found that they do something really, really well. They focused on that. They focused on their scale and became the lower cost producer, for a lack of better words, and were just the most efficient at what they did. And they are the people that are surviving at as tight of prices that we're seeing right now. The people that we've seen probably get their heads ripped off and then really get hit the hardest by the oversupply issue are the companies that have just really gotten out of their wheelhouse, gotten out of their lane, got way too overextended with the things that they were doing and didn't have the scale across the board to survive the market crunch that we saw. So if you're a processor or a grower, if you're really good at doing something, focus on it and make sure that your budget, and just really work on creating a robust budget that can survive more turmoil. Now, getting into planning decisions, you have to be risk averse. Plant only if you have sales negotiated with a reputable buyer. I still think we're 3 to 5 years to actually having a complete open market to where you can plant without these sales being negotiated. And then you have to weigh against all your other alternatives. Principal crops are the highest level they've been. I mean, I would even look at soft red winter wheat if I had the option to. There's just too much opportunity in agriculture this year for hemp to be the only thing that you look at. And then beyond that, know your region. I mean, hemp is a regional market, especially for the industrial applications. For example, like the Southeast, we're seeing a lot of interest on the textile side. In North Carolina, you've got Basscore in Alabama. I believe there's one processor in Tennessee. I'd have to look at the name, but it's a very regional market. So if you're going to grow for fiber, make sure that you have someone in your region that is looking for it. Like right now, the Southeast is probably paying the most premiums for that. If you're looking at herd, a lot of that's going to the Midwest. But the thing with herd is it goes really well with like a dual purpose grain crop. So you have to consider that as well. And then in all, you have to weigh your closest and best options and tailor your crop accordingly. I mean, just because I said CBD opportunities are limited, you could have a processor nearby, and that is your best opportunity. So I'd just say do your homework, play close to the chest, be risk averse, and have a sales contract and vet your buyer. Exactly. Then the last piece is, once you know who your buyer is, know their specs. You have to know their specs. That's the biggest thing that we're doing with our platform right now, is on the industrial side, is using all the buyers that we have on our platform now to almost create a spec sheet or a rudimentary spec sheet. So, and the chief reason we're doing that is for the education side. For CBD, probably the biggest problem I saw on biomass is people producing a biomass that wasn't what a processor wanted. For example, we saw a lot of wet mills in Kentucky, and then there was a lot of material. There's a lot of material that was just almost looked like it was hammer milled or ground as a whole crop. Now, the products that we're seeing getting the most traction for a processor are products that have the shives and herd removed, have all fiber, basically any non-flower CBD material removed, and then it's refined to a small particle size. So one, your potency is still high, and then two, it's just the accessibility of that CBD material. If you can guarantee any processor is going to have success on throughput with your product, they're going to want to work with you from then on. They're going to prefer you. You're going to actually see a premium instead of a discount. And then, yeah, they're going to work with you going forward. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I could give is know your buyer specs and beat them, improve upon it, become your buyer's friend. Now, some closing notes. Again, I have to say 2021 will be the year that industrial overtakes the cannabinoid sector as far as planted acreage goes. Now, cannabinoid prices are due to recover with the Delta 8 volumes that we're moving, and this buyers are actually having to go out and look for biomass again and process biomass. They're not just able to take excess winterized crude off the market anymore. Um, the planted acres are going to determine the extent of rallies. I think if we see 10 to 20,000, we're more than likely going to stall. Now, carbon credits are coming. Expect more sustainability programs to follow. It's not just going to be carbon, it's going to be water, nitrogen, and anything you could think of that involves with sustainability. And ultimately, weigh your planning decisions conservatively this year. Hope is not a strategy. And other than that, that's everything I have. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Seth. This is great presentation, and it's so interesting to see you're estimating like less than 5,000 acres demanded by the market. And I remember I did a very simple calculation back in 2018 at one of our meetings. I think the calculation result was around that range, and still we saw at least 50,000 acres being planted in Tennessee in 2019. And Tennessee alone, that's 10 times more than what the market is demanding. And last year, we did a we did a survey on hemp growers in the industry here in Tennessee, and showed that 90% of our growers that did not sell any of their hemp products back in, well, that's 2020. And so that's really interesting to see that, and I'm really excited about what you share about other markets in the industrial applications with the carbon credits and those market. It's really exciting to see those take off and how our growers can take advantage of that.
Yes, yeah, I hope what I said today was actionable and provides some direction. That's that's my main goal with what I do, is to really help growers and help the grower, help growers as a whole in their planting decisions. I mean, I've seen it from the commercial ag background that I have. Is, I mean, farmers have been pinched for the past, well, for forever, really, but especially these last 5 years with low commodity prices and high inputs. I just think we need diversity in what we can plant and how we can market our land, really. So I hope it provided some value to you all today.
Definitely. Let me just look into the chat box to see if we have any questions. We actually got a couple.
Yeah,
Okay, so the first one, hmm, I'm a
yeah.
little,
See,
go ahead.
are you say like Kathy's seed to
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
sale?
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's awesome. I mean, seed to sale CBD. I think that's great. I think that's a great way to survive COVID, especially just because you have the supply chain in your hands. Probably the people that we've seen them get hurt the most were people that were really diversified and branching out with a lot of partnerships. So that's awesome that you survived COVID. But yeah, I see the out of state products that are coming in. Um, I would say the best way to deal with that is how you market yourself as a Tennessee, like a true Tennessee supply chain. It'd be the best way that I know how to do that. But honestly, like, I guess the thing that I'm missing on the question is really if these are like out of state retail products, or if you're talking about refined, unfinished products coming in and competing. And if it's retail products, I'd say you have to focus on being Tennessee grown. Tennessee produced. And if it's other products coming in, I mean, you can still do the same there, but you've got to look at the other side. Like maybe you could benefit from that as well. I don't know if that's something that you actually want to look at, but honestly, you've got to play the game at some point. Um, and I honestly think you have a good perspective as being a solely Tennessee produced crop. That's where I would start. And then down to the Delta 8 question, I would not say it's legal. It's more of not explicitly illegal. It's just a really gray area. I mean, I say it's an economic opportunity, but that's just at face value. I mean, it could also be a huge risk. That's the other piece you got to look at. Like it may not be explicitly illegal right now, but it could very well be, especially if we see the administration reverse step on legalization, then all of a sudden the DEA gets a little bit more confidence and actually crashes down. I just have no idea if that's going to happen or not. Now, as far as how to make DEA, yeah, it's synthesized. It's not I would not call it a hemp derived product, but the people that are making it now are really skirting that line. All right, I see some other messages came in. Oh yeah, from Kathy as well, like on the all right, yeah. Yeah, Kathy, I agree. Delta 8 is a synthetic product. It's not natural. It's not tested. It's not tested unless, the DEA or someone else comes in and confiscates your product. And I honestly don't think a lot of what we're seeing on the markets aren't safe. And I'm not recommending anyone to try to make it and sell it. I'm just saying if you do want to go down that road, be ethical about it. There are very few people that are making a legitimate Delta 8 product. And you could probably find those people and maybe potentially work with them. I'm not sure. But still, you're still running a huge risk. But really, like the unsafe product that we're really seeing hit the market, that I would say is really from the private market, like not a reputable company or anything like that. But even then, it's just such a huge gray area that I would kind of avoid it until we get more direction. And you never know, we might actually see genetics come through to where Delta 8 can be naturally derived from the hemp all the way to an isolate form and not have to be isomered over. Let's see here. I see Mike Garrison's question as well. Yeah, I see marijuana as going through the same growing pains that the CBD industry has. And honestly, state markets have already been through those growing pains. Like here in Colorado, we dealt with an oversupply issue just like the CBD market did. But the thing with marijuana is I just see the demand being a huge piece of that as well too. I don't know if they'll see the same extent of problems and challenges, but they will be similar. But kind of the neat thing about if we regulate marijuana and CBD together is you could actually see the same thing that we're seeing in Delta 8 with isomering over from CBD isolate into a Delta 9. And honestly, that would be profitable in today's market here in Colorado. Like you can go onto a website for a dispensary here for THC, and a single gram of Delta 9 is $50. But an entire kilogram of CBD you can find for under $1,000. So it doesn't take much math to figure out that you can make money by isomering that over. It's just whether the government let us do that. And Kathy's question again, can biomass be used for medical products? I honestly, I really don't know on that one. I mean, if it's smokable flower, more than likely, yes. If it's just raw biomass, I would say no. It's going to have to be refined somewhere down the road. But yeah, and for it to be considered medical cannabis, I honestly think we just need more open regulations on that. Like right now, it's just very hard to get DEA approved or FDA approved research out there. All right. Iris, do you see any other questions?
I don't.
I think I
And
see another one from Kathy.
okay, go ahead.
So on production indoors versus outdoors, I would say it would be better to grow indoors. You just have less exposure to the elements. You have a safer growing environment. And then, like what we said earlier, it doesn't take that many acres. If you're growing outdoors, you're just at a severe disadvantage to many other people that are growing indoors. So if I was growing for CBD, it would be indoors. If I was doing dual crop or anything else, it would be outdoor. All right.
All right, Seth.
All
Thank
right.
you for
Yeah.
sharing this with our Tennessee folks. And thank you again for coming to Tennessee online. And would you like, I'm interested in that too. And I know some of the researchers still stayed on interested. What kind of service? I guess, like, I do know that PanXchange has subscription, that kind of service. What kind of information or market reports that we, if we're interested in it, or what kind of information will be coming from PanXchange?
Yeah. So here's my contact info on the presentation. I also messaged my personal email as well. So y'all can reach out to me directly or just through Hemp at PanXchange. You can call our direct line, and then you can also request a demo on our site, just a way to get a hold of us. But as far as what we offer on the data side, we offer monthly reports, and then you also have access to all of our benchmark information. Beyond that, like, we could really tailor that as the market develops. This isn't a developed market. So you could have a lot of influence on what we project and what we report on. Beyond that, the platform, the whole goal there is to provide a supplemental spot market for buyers and sellers to offload additional products. So as supply chains aren't perfect, even the grain market's cyclical. There's always going to be a need for 5% of the volume being traded to be traded on a spot market. And that's what we want to provide. And obviously, and all you'd have to do to learn more about that is request a demo on our site or reach out to me directly.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing with us on that.